Now, in the series of concepts, next we talk about love. Now, love has many ramifications and understandings, but we are looking at it love as a source of ethics, and we have seen other concepts which are used around ethics, but how can love be a source of ethics? Well, as a source of ethics, it talks about fellow feeling, about fraternity, and eventually about the ethics of care, right. So, a lot of philosophers and a lot of philosophical thinking, moral thinking has taken place with love as the foundational cornerstone, and by love here I mean the sense of fraternity, the sense of care that we have towards our fellow beings, that we are not looking that human beings, the moral framework, the moral domain that they have does not come out from principles or rationality, but out of a simple feeling of love that comes from towards their brethren. So, ethics of care particularly talks about ethics as being as being rooted or sourced in love. Now, ethics of care has two very important components which we can understand as context and relational. Context and relational. Now, what is meant by here? By context is that is meant that the moral domain arises only out of the context. So, let us think of an example. When your immediate neighbor whom you know very well, whom you interact on a daily basis, suddenly is affected with a disease or affected with a trouble, vis-a-vis another person far away in another continent whom you do not know, but is affected by the same trouble, and you maybe just know of it through the newspaper, say a new form of a disease, you are likely to be more affected by the first, your neighbor, rather than by this person at a distance with whom you do not have any proximity. So, ethics, a lot of moral thinking has wanted to make ethics independent of the context, but whereas ethics of care acknowledges, accepts, and rather celebrates being contextual, that our concern for other comes from the context, from the association that we have, and from the relationship that we have with the other person. So, ethics of care is also a dominant school of moral thinking, which looks at ethics as relational, that because there are relations between human persons, human beings, we are likely to feel more compelled for moral thinking and decision making in people who are in our proximity. So, now this is another way. So, the standard critique of such a theory will always be critiquing that this makes it partial, right, that this is partial to whom we know, and thereby unfair to the stranger. And yes, that is an accepted feeling, that the accepted feature of the ethics of care, that one tends to be concerned or care to offer care, to give care more to a person whom one knows personally rather than someone who is different. And if we reflect phenomenologically on our own behavior and the way human beings associate, we can see the effect of ethics of care, or see how it is in operation in this particular in the framework of our lived experience. Now, closely associated with ethics of care is virtue ethics, and virtue ethics asks a very crucial question. In fact, it changes the typical moral thinking question that talks from what is the right thing to do versus what sort of a person should I be. So, here character or motive becomes more important than rules or principles or consequences of an action. So, it moves from being act based to agent based, right. So, this again is connected with ethics of care and love as the source of moral thinking and as a predominantly strong concept in moral thinking. Let us think of an example. A malicious person may still have it within his power to perform actions that do not reflect that malice, but the malice exists. How would you assess this? So, let us take an example of a patient who is say in coma, is not able to do any actions, but is conscious and can have volitions and intentions. Now, that person, if he is looking at the caregiver with a sense of gratitude or a sense of envy, either way, that these two cases, these two patients, let us assume them as two patients, one both in a state of physically immovable or unable to express their emotions physically, one with gratitude towards their caregiver and one with envy and anger towards their caregiver. Now, both of them have two different emotions towards their caregiver. Can we make a difference between them? Virtue ethics would say yes, whereas the lack of their physicality means that they can't act out or effect their moral standpoint. But does that make the moral standpoint irrelevant? For the virtue ethicist, of course no, definitely no, and probably for most of us no, because an ill will or a good will, even though it is not capable of being expressed, still is an ill will or a good will and is the denominator of moral actions, right. So, here in the example given, when a malicious person may still have it within his power to perform actions that do not reflect that malice, right. So, that if somebody is sniffing out or doing something good, but still has malice within them and the malice exists, how would you look at it? Let us think of a lived experience example of this, which would connect even more to you, even more to most of us. The case of sexual harassment. Now, sexual harassment as an intent or a gaze, not as a physical act, can still be experienced or felt or even regarded as harassment if it is not acted upon, but that the gaze or the and the legal system of India has recognized that the gaze itself can also be held as an example of sexual harassment or assault. So, for love as a concept, one can also look as what we would understand as bhakti in the Indian tradition, that when in the bhakti tradition where one seeks to unite with fellow human beings, with God, and there is a certain all the goodness that emerges from this conjunction with the divine and conjunction with fellow human beings, not as strict principles to be followed. So, whatever emerges from love becomes right. What emerges from love becomes right action. So, this is an example of love which stands as right action. We will talk about virtue ethics more when we talk about ethical theories, but for the moment you should be aware of love as the foundation of the ethics of care and how it is connected with virtue ethics, and when virtue ethics talks about agent based approach rather than an act based approach. That is what is to be taken into account. Now, the final concept for this particular introduction to concepts is the notion of Purushas. We will talk about this in greater detail when we talk about ethics in the Indian tradition. However, let us take a look at Purushas or how it is talked about in the Indian tradition. So, Purusharthas, or as it should be written in the diacritical mark, using Purusharthas, using diacritical marks. Well, these are what is the purpose or the meaning of being a human being. So, what are the ends or goals of life? So, the Indian tradition, typically the Upanishadic Hindu tradition, divides it into 4 categories. Many of us would have known of it right from our upbringing. They are dharma, artha, kama and moksha. Now, these are divided into social and personal. Artha is material well-being, kama is satisfaction of desires, dharma is moral duties, and finally moksha, or which is intensely personal, is liberation or spiritual. So, what is the guide? So, Purusharthas have very often been looked or understood as a part of virtue ethics, because instead of giving blanket edicts and rules to follow, what Purusharthas are talking about are what are the goals of life. So, material well-being. So, anybody who thinks that Indian philosophy is otherworldly or material denying is needs to be corrected, because artha is a valid and valued social goal of Purushartha, that means material well-being. So, material well-being is to be celebrated. Kama, or the satisfaction of desires, it is not just sexual desire, but it is all kinds of desires. The whole fact that we can have desires and satisfy them is again a goal of human life. Imagine it is considered as a Purushartha, that is a goal or an end of human life. However, dharma or moral duties are the duties where the moral component enters strongly, and whenever there is a conflict between dharma and artha or kama, dharma prevails. So, we are looking at dharma as something which prevails over artha and kama, or kama and artha have to be enjoyed under the purview of dharma. With this, that governs our social interaction. When we move to the sphere of personal, there it is moksha or liberation or spiritual self realization that we aim at as the final goal of life. So, in that sense, again to the critics of Indian thinking who look at the world, look at Indian philosophy as being essentially otherworldly, that yes, we need to agree that there is an otherworldly component, because an intense desire for personal liberation is one of or is the final Purushartha of human existence, to look for liberation or spiritual self realization. So, now with this we come over the important concepts of Purushartha and the other moral concepts that you may come, some of the important moral concepts that you may come across in moral thinking. But after that we will look at some more developed concepts, and I will start with paper called The Virtue of Selfishness by an author, celebrated author and a literature, Ayn Rand, on the value of selfishness or and how a moral argument is made. Now, the reason this paper has been chosen is it is both freely available. It has been a very popular part of a literature. Those of you who may have read The Fountainhead or any of the works of Ayn Rand, even if you haven't read, I will share the link of this particular paper. So, this is a typical combination of a literature and a philosopher. So, where the philosophy is expressed in the forms of a piece of story. So, here this paper turns common sense on its head by arguing for the making a virtue out of selfishness, but we will look at how the author defines selfishness and what we can make sense of it.